Hello, this is Professor JPS, and this is Communication Arts 257. This is a lecture which would have been for May the 5th, 2020, which would have been our last screening of the semester, our last unit of the semester. The film for this week is a film made in 1979 called Breaking Away. And it's my fervent hope and wish that you're able to access this film. It was available on Amazon earlier when we first had the NCC shutdown, and my sense is that it's still there. So if you're able to see the film, I would really appreciate you seeing it. I think you'll really enjoy it. If you haven't seen it yet, it is a little bit more uplifting with a little bit more sweetness to some of the cynicism that we had seen in the past few weeks. And I'll get to that film in a couple of minutes. But I just want to do some house cleaning here because it is already May 5th. It's just about May 5th. It's almost midnight. So if this was a normal semester, tomorrow would have been the last film of the year, and we would have talked about last week's film a little bit, which was Network. And then I would discuss a little bit about this week's film, which is Breaking Away. And then you would see the film, and then we'd have a little time to discuss it. And then we would meet next week, May the 12th. And then I would talk about Breaking Away for 45 minutes or so. Then we would have a small break, and then we would have the final exam. Okay, so finals weeks is next week. And that Tuesday is the first day of finals. So this is what I'm proposing I'm doing this evening. In this lecture. This is the last lecture for the semester for this particular class. I'm to go through bit by bit the film Network. In case you haven't seen it, please try to, but I'll give you the information I think most valuable for the examination. And then I will go through Breaking Away in terms of the director and what the film is about and what to expect in the film and what are the most important points of the film. So I'll be doing a kind of description and review at the same time. And then I will give just a couple of minutes to Chinatown. And then there's one last question on the exam that I'll go over just a little bit tonight. And that will be it. And then what I will do is I will send you the email right after this lecture. I will send you the email with the final examination, test questions. And presumably you'll be seeing this on Tuesday, May the 5th. At the very least, it'll be available Tuesday, May the 5th. And then you will have 1 full week to do 4 questions and hand in any screening sheets that you haven't handed in yet. Okay? That's more than enough time, I think. It's just that I have to make sure that you guys know this, and I have to ensure that I start to get some exams because if I get all the exams at once, I really won't have much time to grade them. This is one of 5 classes that I have. So plus I have to, and essentially I have to grade them twice because I'm grading everybody's exam with pen and paper. I'm writing down notes, and then I have to send you back that information in an email. So it's like, it's taking me twice as long. Before we just write on a blue book and hand it to you. And hell, you wouldn't even get the finals back unless somebody asked me for them. So at any rate, I'm going to give you the final a good week early just because I think that's the best measure in this time of COVID because people are stressed and I'm willing to bet that students don't even realize finals are next week. So you will have your final at the end of this lecture. I will send out an email with the final with the 4 questions. Okay, so let me just get right to it. So last week's film, Network, if you didn't see it, please try to see it. I know I can't make you pay for that stuff, but if there's a way you can find to see it on YouTube or whatever, please do. It's a terrific movie, and it's very, very predictive of what was going to happen to television news. The film is made in 1976. And it was directed by Sidney Lumet, L-U-M-E-T. Okay? And these are the things that I think are most interesting about the film in terms of its context. Okay? You may remember the reading. I showed you the reading last week, right? Here's the reading. And the program notes give you some useful information. I'll just go over them very quickly again. Television news, when it first started, was only about 15 minutes long in the 1950s and early 60s. When John F. Kennedy was killed, news grew to 1/2 hour because the news of Kennedy's death and subsequent large news events of the 1960s, like the Vietnam War, like the Civil Rights Movement, like the moon landing, like the coverage of the Vietnam War, both at home and abroad, and the changing times of the 60s, brought much of the nation from newspapers to television, to watch TV much more often. Okay? TV news was not how most Americans got their news until the 70s and 80s. Newspapers were prior to that. TV news grew as newspaper readership declined. We covered a little bit of this in Mass Comm 101 for those of you who may remember. During this time period, in the early to mid-70s, television news networks were not really expected to make money. ABC, CBS, and NBC, until they started to compete with early cable television in the 1980s. Okay? Ratings suddenly became important to TV news producers, whereas before they were not important. Delivering trustworthy news, somewhat trustworthy news, was. Since the time of the film network, TV news has become the chief source for news in most Americans, and it's its weakest form of journalism. The film tries to predict what happens to news when ratings are more important than news. So the general context that what was happening in television news is that producers were more interested in making sure that the ratings were high. So the development and research and editing into the news became much more of something that became entertaining rather than something that was informative. And it's making that bold prediction 44 years ago. Okay, that's the basic context of the era. Why the stuff of the 60s we've been talking about all semester. This is why this film was poignant and predictive and very smart 44 years ago. The sense of the anti-establishment, anti-authority, anti-corporate notions were box office gold in the 1960s and 70s. Okay? Now, let's get to some more specific aspects of the film in terms of what gives this film its power. In terms of the elements of filmmaking, that is to say the mise en scène, right? The elements of filmmaking that Sidney Lumet uses, along with the other people who worked on the film. The cinematography is interesting in this movie, okay? The lighting and / cinematography or photography of the film is very interesting in that it is so plain. And what I mean by that is, you know, most times when you see movies, even dopey, stupid movies, the lighting in movies is so artificial as to create places, even if they're real places, to make them look more beautiful than they really are. And we're so used to seeing elaborate, vivid, colorful, shadowy, beautiful lighting in filmmaking, okay? And in this film, the lighting is there to not make it seem pretty. The offices, even the outdoor scenes, the indoor scenes in the television studios, the indoor scenes in restaurants, the indoor scenes in offices and the studio itself. All of the lighting in the film is made to feel like it looks like television lighting, and especially television lighting from that time period. It's all very even and plain and very unadorned. There's very little shadowy effect. There's very little vivid use of color. There's very little use of harsh contrast between light and dark imagery. There's very little dark imagery. There's very little light imagery. It's all as if it's shot under, what is that called? the light bulbs, the incandescent light bulbs or fluorescent light bulbs in offices. The lighting all the way through the movie tries to mimic what television lighting looks like. And television lighting is not as good as film lighting. Film lighting absorbs much more light and can make things look really pretty. Even if you don't notice them, you would notice if it didn't look real, because it's not heightened at all. The lighting in this film is real plain and superficial, and it's made to look like you're in an office or watching it on television, particularly old-fashioned television, not the HD stuff that you're used to, okay? So that's one thing, okay? Another thing this film uses is long takes, and lots of them, okay? Part of the reason the film uses long takes, that is to say, turning the camera on and letting the action happen in a lengthy period before there's an edit or a cut. Part of the reason there's so many long takes in the film is rather verbose. And when I say verbose, I mean wordy. These characters talk, and they talk a lot. Faye Dunaway has 7 or 8 speeches in this particular movie. William Holden has a good 4 or 5 speeches in this movie. Howard Beale character, played by Peter Finch, he has 4 or 5 speeches in the movie. The movie is very talky. It's a script-bound film, much more than, say, like an action film or a film that shows off lots of camera movement. There's not a whole lot of camera movement in here. Its strength is in its script and its wordplay. So a wordy script corresponds with stable, long takes, okay? Not a whole lot of editing in this movie. Lots of long takes. It has on-location shooting for the most part. I mean, there may be some studio stuff that I don't notice, but for the most part, this film is shot in and around New York City, on real New York City streets, not a studio set, in real offices, in real restaurants, in a real hotel room. I mean, the film is pretty much realistically depicted that way in terms of its visual imagery, okay? And the film, in terms of its camera usage in spatial locations, not special, but spatial, the film is relatively intimate in its use of space. It's relatively intimate. The characters are often in closed spaces. They're in offices. They're in a television studio. They're in apartments in New York City. They're in restaurants in New York City. Even when they're walking outside in the street, they're framed by the large buildings in New York City. And the film has a great deal of use of medium close-up and close-up. There's not a whole lot of pulling back of the camera to show wide shots, or not a whole lot of lens use that's distorts the wide-angle lens. It's relatively intimate in its shooting style. And I think the intimacy is to show the pressure that everyone's under, and also the emotional distress that everyone's under. The camera's in closer to a medium and to a close-up, medium close-up and close-up. It suggests the idea of pressures, both financial and job-related, and also emotional pressures that the characters are under, okay? The other thing about this particular film is that it rests very interestingly and very strangely, in fact, still 44 years later, somewhere between satire and overt realism. Now, that's a little bit of a heady thing for you guys to think about, but I think you can see that the film is relatively exaggerated in some of its examples, especially when they have the African-American woman and the insurrectionist guy, and they're having, he's got the gun, and they're trying to talk about how they're going to split up their overhead costs on production facilities, and the people who are robbing these banks are coming in to argue with network executives. I mean, that's a pretty exaggerated idea. That would never really happen. But the movie asks you to consider that. So it has some exaggeration to kind of satirize or make fun of this new emerging power of information. But the characters all play it very, very straight. So the film is, on some level, it finds this sweet spot between something that's an exaggeration and something that's trying to make a dire warning about the future of television news. And it does it, I think, quite well, particularly in the character of Faye Dunaway. She plays it so perfectly straight. And she's essentially someone who's lost any sense of ethics or morals completely. She's utilizing absolute power that will corrupt, absolutely. Okay? And in terms of what happens at the end of the film, for those of you who haven't seen it, we've had over a week or whatever, so I'll have to let you know, spoiler alert, but the Howard Beale character, what happens to him is seen as like a sardonic, sadistic, almost joke that a news corporation would go that far. And at the end of the film, when they show all those images on the director's area in the television studio, it's suggesting that in terms of television, they don't really care about death or murder or political insurrection. They just care about what sells. It's all the same. It doesn't matter. It's all a commercial enterprise. So the news just becomes one more way to garner ratings, to then charge commercial enterprisers more money for them to then sell to us, right? It used to be that programming was what drew audiences. But if you took something as sacred as the news and the First Amendment and the ability for the American people to understand a set of facts squarely and in good faith, well, that doesn't matter. That's what's happening in this movie. They're predicting that responsible people were going to turn irresponsible, so they could make the news and tweak it into a big game. Now, what I think is most valuable about that, even 44 years later, even if this is not your kind of movie, even if the style just seems so ancient to you, think about this. Think about the prediction that this particular film makes in saying that news becoming sensationalized and bastardized and watered down to an infotainment idea, and how cable television networks over the past 25 to 30 years have made this prediction come true, and how the idea of reality television has made people, sort of audiences, look and hunt for the most exaggerated, ridiculous, dumbed down version of American life that they can get their jollies watching from the comfort of their own living room. Now, it would seem to me that the film network, written by Patty Chayefsky and directed by Sidney Lumet 44 years ago, made a pretty good prediction of how television news, in the route it was taking to make news more entertaining, ultimately results in a dumbed down population, an ill-informed population that doesn't understand facts when they see them, that doesn't trust the news when they see it, and is able to feature out into their own ecosystems of hearing what they want to hear. And it seems to me that there's no way in the world that a reality star person could have run for the highest office in the land if that didn't happen, let alone win. I mean, what was reality television, right? It's a facsimile of real life. It's not the real thing. It's just a show. It's just a game. And I think the film network made some bold predictions that, in my view, both as your teacher and also as a citizen of this country and someone interested in politics and media and power, is a sad comment. At any rate, the mise-en-scène stuff I just went over, I think is important, and also the notions of the context of the growing era, okay? In terms of the film Breaking Away is made in 1979. And it's a film that's really about what you would call class consciousness. Okay. I want to describe a little bit about the story. It's an uplifting film. It's got a little bit more heart, a little bit more hope. I leave you with some hope at the end of this. But it's also a film, I think, that is touching in how it treats the idea of class consciousness and the American dream at the end of the 20th century, or nearing the end of the 20th century. The film is about four 19-year-old guys who live in Bloomington, Indiana, which is a college town. The University of Indiana, is housed in Bloomington. And these are four working class guys who have graduated from high school the year before and then have taken a year off, and they're not really doing much with their lives because they're trying to figure out their own identities and their own place in the world. But the whole time they live in this college town. So there's this built-in conflict between the working class community, who more or less don't go to college, and the whole town that is a college town, which means that every year new freshmen come to this college town. And in a way, the four boys who are of that town feel alienated to them. Now, the film is a bit strange in some ways because you're not really sure where it's going in the early stages. There's the ostensible protagonist is a guy called Dave, who rides around on a bicycle. He's a bicyclist, and he wins many bicycle races and bicycle, I guess races is the best way I can put it. But he so adores the Italian bicycle tradition, Team Cinzano, that he half the time talks in Italian. He speaks in Italian, he adopts this Italian personality, and his friends bust his chops for it, but he's just kind of goofy. And his father can't understand him. His father is a used car salesman. Now, his father used to work in quarries. He used to make stone. I don't know if you know this idea of Indiana limestone. Indiana limestone apparently is supposed to be very good limestone that you build buildings with or floors with or whatever. I don't know too much about why Indiana, but it was a very, very good place for working class people to make a living all through the 20th century. Now, the film takes place in 1979 after a big recession. So the father no longer has his job in the quarry because those jobs have closed for the most part. This was indicative of American companies closing and leaving for China in the late 70s and early 80s, leaving for other parts of the world. And the sense of the American dream was diminishing. I don't know if you know the American dream. The American dream is the idea that parents work very, very hard to give their children a better life, so the child will have a better life and so forth. The child will go further on the economic scale than the parent did. And that economic American dream was working pretty well from post-World War II up until the late 70s. And in the late 70s, there was a kind of throwback to the economic situation was a bit diminished. I can remember growing up in the 70s where there was 2 or 3 recessions and oil embargoes, and it was a little bit scary time. So this particular fella who used to make a decent living, he's now reduced to being a used car salesman, and he lies to all his customers. And his son, he's an innocent. He doesn't understand why his father has to lie. So the movie meanders between the 4 friends who have these conflicts with the college kids from time to time. But the basic idea is what happens is they get into this bicycle race. The University of Indiana used to have this thing called the Little 500, where they would have a team bicycle race that would mimic the Indianapolis 500. And so you have to watch the film, but I will tell you, because we only have a week left in school and so forth, what happens is the working class guy, Dave, he goes through a difficult time, and he first races with the Team Cinzano, the Italian racers who come to Indiana, and he stays right with them, and they cheat him. They knock him over off his bike, and he didn't understand. He was too innocent to know that people cheat. And his father tries to console him, and it's a very, very moving scene where the father's telling him that everybody cheats, and that's just a hard lesson to learn in life, and that we have compromises and we have stuff to do. And it's a real nice scene. I hope you ever get a chance to see the film. And then there's a love story where the Dave, the guy, he meets a lovely woman, and he pretends to be this Italian guy, and he pretends to let her know that he makes up this whole identity, and she kind of has a thing for him. And then ultimately he confesses to her that he's not, and she slaps him in the face and blah, blah, blah. And then he gets into the bicycle race with the rich kids who were part of the University of Indiana, and it's a real nail biter. And then the working class guys win. They win, and there's an uplifting part at the end of the film. And the film is a little bit, it's a little bit nicer than some of the films we've seen. I would strongly encourage you to try to get a chance to see the film the next week. But it's a film where there's a couple of things going on in the film that I think are really quite good. One is the idea that the class consciousness, the working class, was no longer expanding and moving upward. It was sort of stalled. And this film tries to illustrate that with the four boys who are, not too rich, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. And there's four of them, and one is even really quite poor. And the other one is, handsome and athletic, but he can't quite get it together, and he's not that smart. And there's another one who's not too bad, but he's just kind of a goofball. And they all help each other to win the race. They all contribute to winning the race. Even though the lead guy, who's a very good bicycle race guy, he falls off the bike and he hurts himself, and the other three help, and they help to actually win the race against the bad rich kids at the university. The thing explores the idea of understanding working class fears and sensibilities. And there's a name given to the people who live in the town. They're called cutters, mainly because there used to be a bunch of stone cutters who used to cut stone. And the father takes the boy, Dave, for a walk on the university campus, and he says, I cut the limestone to this building. It was pretty good. I liked my job when I was younger. I wasn't ashamed to be what I was. I was a working class man, and I did my work, and it was good work, and I can see the buildings, and here they are. And then suddenly those things closed, and I had to sell cars. And he's asking his son, does he want to go to college? Because if he has the smarts to do it, he should do it. And the son says, I don't have to go to college. I'm a cutter. And the father looks him in the eye and says, you're not a cutter. I'm a cutter. And the kid realizes that he doesn't have to necessarily stay with his own father's past, that he has his own identity, that he can break through from being considered what the college kids call him. And it's a real nice moment in a film that when you're going from being an adolescent to a man or a young woman, you have to learn these things. You can't just you start to recognize that there's a difference between being in high school and then being in the real world. And like all the drama of high school that everybody went through immediately disappears 5 days after graduation, which 2 months earlier was the most important thing in your life. This film tries to get at that, and also tries to really, really have issues of what were then contemporary notions of the American dream diminishing. It's a really nice film, and it's filled with all kinds of interesting elements, and it gives some hope to some of the cynical films like Taxi Driver and Network that I had shown to you. A couple of things in terms of mise en scène of the film. The film uses classical music really beautifully because it's exciting, because the classical music is cut to the many practices that Dave uses while he's riding his bicycle all over the place. So there's a kind of visual beauty to some of the scenes where he's riding his bike all through the landscape of Indiana, and the classical music is there to punctuate that scene. So the classical music is really, really nicely done. I forget which classical music is. It's in the reading. Again, the film is completely shot on location. All location, the college town at the University of Indiana in Bloomington, Indiana. It's a nice town. I've been there. It's a really great college town. And it's shot all on location, and it evokes the sense of realism, that these are real people and it's really happening. This is another film that has lots of long takes, and it's a fairly wordy script. Well, not completely wordy. But the movie maker is a guy called Peter Yates. Peter Yates. and he's a British filmmaker, and his filmmaking style is pretty somber. It's pretty quiet. He doesn't, although he's had some action films in his life, but this particular film is fairly somber and quiet in terms of its filmmaking ability, but lots of long takes. The other thing this film has is it has pretty good 3-act structure. And it's mainly about Dave's choices. He makes a choice to talk to this particular woman and adopt a particular identity. And that's the end of the first act because he can't go back on that. He's made a choice to do something. He's made an action. And once he's made that action, the second act depends upon him keeping up this false identity. And then when he challenges himself to actually tell this woman that he cares about that he's been lying to her, that's the end of the second act. So the movie it's paced quite well and has really good 33 and a third first act, 33 and a third second act, and 33 and a third act. And it's actually quite well developed as a written script. This is not going to seem like a big deal to you, but at the time period, it's a pretty good shot. It has one beautiful 360-degree camera shot that stays right in focus. And not only does it stay in focus, but it's timed perfectly for the bicycle race. The bicycle race through a town and through this highway system where the Team Cinciano, the Italian team, comes down this beautiful roadway, and the bikes go this way, and the camera goes all the way around and follows them, turns all the way around again, and then catches the bicycles as they're coming perfectly. I mean, in that day and age when it was just handheld camera doing that, it was a really beautifully timed 360-degree, all-in-focus shot that evokes a sense of style and timing that was just exquisite. In terms of your films that you see with computer-generated stuff, it's not going to seem that important, but it wasn't somebody pushing buttons at a computer screen. It was someone actually with a camera, with light, with the sunlight, and moving the camera in focus perfectly to time something so perfectly. The other thing about the film that I think is very, very interesting is that it kind of is kind of multi-generic. And when I say generic here, I don't mean Walmart. I mean genre. It has many genres, or you could kind of categorize it in a few different genres. I mean, it's a coming of age film, right? Where people are growing up, going from adolescence to manhood, in this case, manhood. It's also a romance film. There's a pretty strong romance in the film. In fact, there's 2 strong romances in the film. It's not only that, but it's you could categorize it as a sports film. Much of the third act is the bicycle race, and it's shot very well. It's shot pretty simply, but the actors do a very, very good. The actors do a very, very good job in what is a real race. I mean, the lead actor and the guy that he beats, it's done in long shot, and he's actually racing him, and he beats him by this much. It's really quite. I mean, oftentimes in films like that, they'll cut back and forth, so you can't really see. But here it's shot wide, and you see them actually coming up the finish line in real time in a very long shot, and it's narrated by the guy at the stadium. So it's kind of like a sports film. It's a coming of age story. It's a romance film. And it's also, you could say, a class-based film because the characters recognize their own strengths and weaknesses as working class characters in a time of crisis for working class people. Okay? So the film is along those lines. And it's a well-crafted film. The pages I want you to look for in the reading, I hope you all have the reading. I've even underlined them for you on 219. Some of the information on 219 is underlined here, and then other information on 220 at the top of the page, and also at the bottom of the page, to give you a sense of what I think is valuable about this particular film. Okay, it's really a terrific movie in many ways, and I hope you're able to get a chance to see it in the next week. And however, you can see it through Amazon, Netflix, YouTube, or other ways. I hope you can be able to see it. Just a couple of things on Chinatown. Chinatown, you may remember it it kind of changed film noir a little bit. We talked about the idea that film noir had a kind of set of principles, usually pretty dark, and about people who were doing mysterious things and illegal things. And very often it was spurred by a femme fatale, a female character who was utilizing her sexual traits to trap a man to get him to do what she wanted. And this particular film looks like Faye Dunaway is going to be a femme fatale, but she really isn't. And there's no way you could have known what was going to happen in that film unless you had seen the film before, obviously. And the Nicholson character finds out stuff the same time we do, so it's a big shock. So it sort of breathed new life into film noir. How did it do that is kind of what I'm going to be asking. And even though the film, like Bonnie and Clyde and like MASH and like Godfather, take place in a different time period, how do they evoke the themes of the 60s and 70s? Okay. And the idea of corruption and power. And even though Nicholson figures everything out, he still loses. Okay. And then, just look at the Chinatown lecture, how we talked about some of the elements of mise-en-scène in that particular film and how the film was very, very powerful. Network we discussed this evening and a little bit last week, and Breaking Away. We talked a little bit about tonight about Peter Yates as the movie maker. Okay. So anyway, that's a kind of streamlined version. If you have questions, please email me this week. As soon as I finish this, I'm going to just email you all saying what was in this, and then I'm going to email you the final exam, the 4 questions, the final exam. Also, just remember that at the very beginning of the semester, we talked a little bit about what happened in Hollywood in the early 60s. Hollywood in the early 60s, prior to all the films we had seen, was losing money, and they didn't have a firm grasp on what the audience wanted to watch anymore. Times were changing, demographics were changing, and television was keeping people at home and not going to the movies as much. And you may remember that some of the early films we saw this semester, they were a chance that the movie studios were having and getting people to come to movie theaters, and something like Easy Rider was a real surprise. Okay, so just keep that idea in mind. There's one extra question that deals a little bit about with that era. Okay. So just email me any questions you have. Again, indicate who you are and what class you're in. Make sure you say it's Joe Blow from Com 257 or Jane Smith, Com 257, okay? And I will gladly discuss any of this with you. And then I will let you know, but in my email, I'll let you know when the final is due. The final is due a week from Tuesday. So it's now Tuesday morning, it's 12:30. And so it's May 5th. This exam has to be back to me on May 12th by midnight. Tuesday, May 12th by midnight. Okay? That way I can at least get, if you want to send it a little early, that's fine with me, but I want to make sure that I have some time to make sure I go over the finals. That's 7 full days to do 4 questions. I think you should be able to handle that. The other thing is, I've been saying this in the last few videos. I know that you guys probably have no idea what you're going to be doing for summer or fall. Just know this, that NCC is here for you, okay? I know it's not the same since we can't go to an office and talk to, people at records or people at the business office, but they are working. They are answering emails, okay? I don't know anything about financial aid. I will try to put you in good contact with people with financial aid. But you really have to, know what you're doing for the fall, okay? We don't know if we're going to be in the classroom in the fall. I hope to God we are. I have no idea. But you have to pre-reg for classes if you're able to pre-reg. Please pre-reg for classes, okay? I'm teaching 2 film studies classes. Maybe some of you already had them. One is COM 256, Focus on the Director. That's on Thursdays. One is COM, sorry, just went out of my head. One is COM 157, which is in American film, not American Film Heritage. This is American Film Heritage. American film is all independent cinema, okay? So I'm teaching that on Tuesdays, just like this class, okay? 1 to 4:15. Plus there's film and TV classes. There's 3 different journalism classes, Journalism 1, Media Writing, and Digital Journalism. So for those of you who need a 200 level journalism writing class, take one of the 200 level ones, okay? And email me. Let me know that you need help. You picking classes. I'll be happy to do so, okay? I don't know when we're going to be let back in the classroom. I don't know. I'm also teaching a summer class. I don't have great hopes for that, but we'll see. That's all online right now. I've been doing I did some Blackboard training for the first time in my life, and I hated it, but I think I can manage. I am doing that class. I don't know if it's going to make it. It only has 1 person enrolled, but we'll see. It's also COM 256. I'm teaching that in the fall too. So if you're interested, please let me know. But please be safe. We are not out of the woods yet. In Connecticut's better. It's definitely better, but we are not out of the woods yet. You have to make sure you're maintaining your distance with people. I know you're teenagers. You're maybe in your early 20s. You're used to hanging out with your friends and so forth. I know but you just can't take those risks, man. You can't just think you're indestructible, because you are not. Okay. There's been 5, 6 students that I've known who have had COVID, and as far as I know, they're all doing much better. But please keep washing your hands. You run out to the store, make sure you're using hand sanitizer if you have it. Just wash your hands all the time. I'm touching my face all the time here. Don't touch your face, and just stay home as much as you can, and we'll get out of this all together, okay? Also, keep checking your NCC email. Now, I don't quite understand exactly, but it's my understanding that all the professors are going to give you their regular grades, A, B, C, D, and F. And then by June 30th, it's my understanding that every student has a chance, if they want, to just go to pass-fail, right? Now, I don't know what that's going to mean in terms of your actual credit allocation, but if you do, I guess if you do really poorly, or things are just crazy, and say I end up giving you a D or a C and you feel like you didn't deserve it, you have the option of doing pass-fail. But I don't know exactly how that's being worked out just yet, in terms of what that'll mean for either your credit or what that'll mean for transfer. But do look at your NCC email. And by the way, in the summer classes, everything is NCC email. You can't use your personal email anymore if you're going to do any Blackboard stuff or online classes. So you have to know what your NCC email is. Okay? I miss you guys. I really do. It's a drag. This is like one of my favorite times a year, and this is very hard. I mean, I got to admit, I've been blue a lot lately, and I just have to keep understanding that we have a job to do, and that we're all in this together, and we all literally in it together. Because you could be asymptomatic and giving to somebody without even knowing, and you have to be careful, and you have to keep what's important in your heart and your families and your friends, and also just when you get blue, when you get weirded out like this, you just got to toughen up a little bit. Because I feel like it. I feel like just it's terrible. I mean, it's just terrible. But particularly if you're healthy, you have to really don't take that for granted, man. I've had some students who are just wiped out and scared, and their families. So This is just a movie class. It's not going to change your life significantly, but it's my hope that, you know, watching a movie may distract you and you may learn a few things about 1960s and 70s films. I wish you all the very best. I wish you a great summer, as much as we can have a great summer. But email me anytime for the rest of your lives. And as long as I have this NCC email account. And I will, in a few minutes, send out the test over email to the COM257 email. Okay? Take care. Be well. Stay safe.